Thanks for jumping on this episode of Giant TV. Really fired up to have Herb Dyer as my guest on this episode. Herb has an incredible background as an executive, is now a business consultant and executive coach, and is doing great things. You're going to love this discussion. Let's go jump in. Hi, everybody. Thanks for jumping on Giant TV. This is Paul Hitchcock, the founder and president of Giant Jacks Media. And in my line of work, I get to meet and work with some very dynamic people. And Herb Dyer, who is on the show today, is one of those people. Welcome, Herb.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah, great to have you here. And Herb, you and I have talked a lot offline. I want to just jump right into what you're doing, because you are spinning a lot of plates, and you're an executive coach, you're a consultant on mastermind programs, which I want to get to that. But let's start off with, how did you get started in business? What's your background?
So healthcare, going back to when I was an undergrad, I started working in a hospital, made some impression on the executives there, and pretty much kind of rose up through the ranks and became an executive myself.
Oh, in the hospital arena there?
Yes, absolutely. So I've worked in probably about 4 or 5 different hospital network throughout my career. I lived in New York City for most of my life, lived there until 2006.
Grew up in New York City?
Grew up in New York City.
Oh, yeah.
Lived in Brooklyn for a while, lived in Queens for a while, and then ultimately relocated to Austin, Texas in 2006.
Okay, so wait a minute, I got to ask you, New York Knicks or Brooklyn Nets?
The Knicks. Of course, I'm not too impressed with what they've been doing over the last few years, but going back to DeBusschere and, Klein, I mean, those guys, they were just fantastic, man. When you think about Earl the Pearl and those guys back from the 70s, yeah. And even, to be honest with you, even when Patrick Ewing was playing, they had some really good games.
Phenomenal, yeah. Well, interesting. So you got started in working in the hospitals, and then how did you transition out of there? What was the next step?
So I would say, majority of those years, my executive years were in healthcare. And the last 11 years, I was here in Central Texas, working for Ascension Seton. So I was a vice president there and did a lot of different assignments for the organization. So one of the first assignments that I took on was overseeing the design build of a hospital.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, run it on a day-to-day basis as a chief operating officer. And
did you go to Texas for the job, or how did you end up there?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things there. So, my wife is from Texas.
Oh, okay.
We were married probably 6-7 years at that point, and I knew she wanted to relocate outside of New York City because it was a bit hectic, and we had 2 children at the time. My son was 7, my daughter was about 12 months old, or whatever the case may be.
Oh, those are good moving ages too, because kids are kind of still young in school and everything.
Absolutely. So they were in their formative years, and we agreed that let's make a move. So I did some preliminary work, reached out to Seton. I knew one of the board members, so the contact with human resources was a little bit easier than normal. So negotiated with them probably about a year or so, and then took on a project here. So it was a combined move. The move was very easy because Vanessa's family, my wife, her family lived here. So it was an easy move, moving family here. Yeah.
No, nice. And then out of healthcare, you started, is it from there, when you moved out of there, that you got into coaching, consulting, that arena?
Yes. So in 2017, I made a decision to move on from Seton. I was there for 11 years. Took on several assignments there that were relevant to capital projects and some other initiatives that we put in place in terms of market shares and so forth. in 2017, I made a decision to move on. And in moving on, I took some time off with the family, do a little bit of bonding and so forth. In fact, one of the first trips I did was I took my daughter to Colorado and did some mountain biking with her.
Oh, you did? Oh, nice. Why Colorado? Because you just wanted to go there, or?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't know that I was so influenced, but a lot of my neighbors have homes in Colorado, second homes.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine who was a physician at one of the hospitals that I was overseeing has a place in Colorado, and he invited me out. And, we went out for probably about a week or so. And Mike is into mountain biking. So
nice.
He convinced me. I, on the other hand, is a road cyclist. So it was an interesting experience riding those little ridge. Those, you have a 40-foot drop, and the roadway is only like 18 inches wide. So it was kind of interesting for me riding in the mountain there.
Yeah. So you guys were doing some technical rides out there. You weren't riding big, fat, wide fire roads or anything like that. You were up there challenging.
No. And of course, I wanted to make an impression to Mike that this roadie could hang out with him in the mountain bike.
Of course, this softy over here, can he do it?
Yeah.
Well, what was it like getting into coaching and consulting? Was it hard to make that transition? Did you just jump right in and go to town?
Well, I would say, I think you and I have spoken also about the uncomfortable areas, right? So stepping out of my executive role, where I used to pick up the phone and get assistance, in terms of whether it was finance, marketing, or whatever, that world changed when I decided to do my own consulting business. So now I was the chief bottle washer. I was doing everything, from marketing to advertising to, doing the admin work. So it was quite interesting making that transition, as well as learning some things that I needed to formalize. Like I went out and got a certification in neuroscience because I wanted to have that relationship with my clients so that I could ask those appropriate questions in terms of the coaching model. Now, transitioning for me was not hard in terms of coaching because, as an executive, that's what you do. You coach people. And I had thousands of folks, not directly reporting to me, but in terms of, for example, one of the largest hospitals that I oversaw, we had close to 2,000 people there, from physician and nurses to support staff and so forth. So having those conversations, you're always listening keenly, but you're also giving subtle advice and or coaching folks to the next level. Because at the end of the day, you want people to provide the services that you promise. You want to meet your vision and mission.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up because in your tenure as an executive, you're naturally coaching. I mean, you obviously are helping people along in their careers, and you're making big decisions and following trends. So, makes sense. Well, then what did you? So, as you were building out the coaching business, did you decide to focus on a particular area of when you were coaching, or where did you go?
Yeah, so having a relationship with particular companions in the executive range, that was an easy transition. So I coach executives, and executives meaning from corporate to small business owners.
Yep.
And secondly, when I got involved, I went out and did some orientation with Vistage, which is a peer advisory group,
Right.
So in getting involved with them, after about a year, I decided to transition back to my company.
Right.
A lot of the things that we do in the company around coaching, peer advisory, as well as group coaching, those things were so similarly aligned that it made sense to me to just transition back into pattern shifts with my company.
Totally, which gets me into what you're doing now, because I want to dive into this a little bit. When you say executive coaching, and this is, I know the answer. You and I've talked a bit here, but there's a lot of consultants and coaches out there. Seems like everybody's calling themselves a consultant or coach today. You're very different in what you're doing, very unique. So tell me how your process stands out a bit. Like, where do you see the differentiators there?
Right. I think one of the things, it's not just for me, it's my partners and I, excuse me, when we created this company.
You have two partners?
Yes, I have. Yeah, Susan Franzen and David Kaiser.
Right, right.
My partners, when we created Pattern Shifts, our focus was to create an organization that was more of a boutique consultant firm, one that tailor-made whatever services that we agree on for our clients to consistently tailor-made those needs. So the same thing applies to the peer advisory model. I don't just look at, okay, we do these 3 or 4 or 5 things in defining how you create strategic planning with your peer advisory members, but we work in a sense of delivering what the membership needs. So whenever those requests are made, we go out and we do our appropriate research if we don't have information readily at hand. We also bring in experts, content experts, to work with those individuals. Now, that may sound generic in terms of, other peer advisory companies doing the same, but we really have a strong pride on delivering to the needs of our clients. So whatever is asked of us, we make those adjustments.
These are clients asking you about challenges and opportunities they're facing in their jobs or projects related to the company, just or everything. What is it?
Both of those things that you just mentioned, but it could be, and I think one of the things that defines how this coaching, strategic planning, and developing that accountability with the membership is that you build personal and professional growth. Mm-hmm. So, you don't separate that. I think when you and I were younger men, especially in business, we were told the way to lead effectively is to be objective. You get data, you assess it, and you make a decision. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that the first thought in our mind is it's capturing our feelings. So your feelings are associated, whether it's in your personal or professional life. So it's how do you manage those two things and ultimately make effective decisions? Of course, that's from a looking at it from one person's perspective. But when you bring the group together, we go through that process of making sure that if members are having issues personally, that we have that confidential discussion where we can clean that up so that they can make a more effective decision in terms of their business. So it's managing that process. How do you balance it?
So that's fascinating to me because, you're a business consultant coach, but you've got to get into the personal side of things because it's ignorant to think that somebody's personal issues don't bleed into the running of a business, right? I mean, that's right. Insane to think that. We're all human beings. So how do you get people to open up to you personally? I mean, that's got to be a talent in and of itself. And do they do that with your group?
Yes. And I will say to you, with the other peer advisory groups, it's not that they don't do that. They do.
Right. Yeah.
You need to build your operating process, procedures, policies that, whatever is discussed, defined in those meetings are confidential. Mm-hmm. By bringing a guest speaker, for example, I have them sign an NDA. So It's understood that when you come into those meetings, everything is privately managed. Okay. And with a membership, there is a sense of accountability and a sense of vulnerability that's displayed there. Mm-hmm. Some people it takes a little bit longer. What we do in our company, what I do for my peer advisories, we do a personality assessment, and we meet as a group and share those personality assessment from an individual to a group basis. So everyone in that room understands that other person's areas of strengths and weaknesses.
I was going to ask you, why do you do that? And you just answered the question, because obviously it helps if everybody sees where everyone else is coming from. That's got to be great for the interaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. So and because it's confidential, because it's managed that way, there is trust in that room. So, I think back in terms of my corporate world, I built trust with my direct reports through psychological safety. So they know I am trustworthy. They know that they can speak to me about their personal as well as their business challenges. And they know that it's going to be managed in a confidential manner that's never going to expose them.
Yeah.
So, and that's where you coach individuals to take to the next level. So once they know that they're psychologically safe and there's trust, you can move the mountain.
Yeah.
And,
Yep, I can see that. But when you talk about personality assessments and sharing, I start getting the cold sweat because I feel like if you did that with me, you're gonna like spend 4 hours pointing out my weaknesses. You know,
no,
you got to be
no,
vulnerable, right? You got to open up and be vulnerable with
sure,
these things.
sure,
Isn't that
sure.
right?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is this, like, for example, Gallup, they have the strengths finders, right?
Yeah.
And they focus on your top 5 to 6 strengths. And they suggest that you focus on that and not necessarily on the opportunities or the negative or the weaknesses. And think about it as human beings, when you get an annual assessment, no matter how great you may have done throughout the year, and you have that one thing, you need to pay attention to detail.
Right.
You walk around the rest of the month thinking, oh man, I can't believe that I got, that I'm not detail oriented, or, I have a shortcoming. But
Yeah.
the reality is that we all have strengths and we have some areas of opportunity. And the idea is, how do you get coached into managing and elevating your strengths while also in a subtle way working on your weaknesses without necessarily having that distract from where you shine.
Right. Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
the things that we do with these groups so that folks don't always look at, oh my goodness, I have a weakness here, so I can't accomplish this. And the idea around the group is that you work as a team. You support each other.
Right. Right. No, love it. Love it. And I'm curious, you've got two business partners. How do you work that? Do you divide responsibility with the firm? I mean, do you look at your own strengths and weaknesses and say, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do this? And how is the interaction with you and your business partners?
Yeah, so when we created Pattern Shifts as well, we created from our personalities, for lack of a better description. So Susan is been a for lack of a better word, a lifetime coach. So she had her own consultant firm 20 plus years ago. So she's been in that coaching arena. She has also worked heavily in OD, organizational development,
Okay.
and worked for multiplex universities or complex universities where she worked across systems. So that's, for example, that's her area to embrace, right? So those relationships that Pattern Shifts has with universities, Susan is kind of the lead for that. And, David and I will get involved based on where we're needed to either facilitate a meeting or help build programs for those contracts that we have in place. David is a finance person, but also a production technical individual. So David does some behind the scene type work for us as well as facilitating. And David is in fact working on a program where he's looking at developing a leadership model for middle managers, particularly.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And myself, I do, as I told you at the top of the hour, that I do executive coaching. I create these peer advisory models, as well as go out into organization and do assessments. I've also, believe it or not, been writing some white paper for some of the clients that I've contracted with over the last few years.
What do you enjoy the most about your job, Herb, doing?
It's funny. When I was in healthcare, I enjoyed a challenge. So, being a visionary, even though I was a chief operating officer, I enjoyed the combination of being a visionary, but also paying attention to operations. How do we make this operation as efficient as possible? And making sure that the team work in concert to deliver that. So my role was to make sure that I raise up all of those players to be the best they can be, to be the best in terms of their area of responsibility, but most importantly, working together as a team. And that's where we were able to meet those goals on a routine basis. So one of the things that I'm most proud of is, away from the financials, in meeting those or accomplishing those goals financially, we were also able to produce in the top 90th percentile of patient satisfaction.
Wow.
Feedback, objectively done by a third party, identified that we were able to deliver those services high in safety, high in being responsible to the needs of our clients. So I would say to you, going back to your question, I always take on a challenge, knowing that I will, if I don't have the skill to do it, I will find the appropriate individuals to help me support doing that.
Yep. Interesting. And whenever I hear somebody talking to me about goals and seem like you're very focused on efficiency in what you're doing, I often wonder, where does that come from? Were you raised in an efficient environment as a kid where, were your parents efficient, or, is it part of your DNA? Always curious about that.
I think it's all of the above. And I say that meaning that, I immigrated to the United States when I was 11 years old. I was born in Jamaica, the Caribbean.
Okay.
And my dad had a farm. So one of the things that happened early in the morning at 5 a.m. is, it wasn't every morning, but you had to get up and go and assist with, whether it's gathering the cattle or, helping to milk the cows. Back then, we didn't have the electric milkers. So you assist with those things, and you had a responsibility. So you learn grit, you learn developing positive habits from early on.
Oh, yeah.
I would say, being a leader, being organized, that's something that has developed over time. So as I made mistakes, and trust me, I've made mistakes, right? You learn from those mistakes and you correct them. My goodness, I think early on, when I was early in my 20s, I was managing a staff of about 60. And I had to learn and understand that some of those judgmental things that you handled personally, when you dealt with staff, you had to look at that from a different angle. You had to make sure that you respect everyone in an equal sense, but identify where you need to make adjustments based on those individuals' needs.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, I didn't know that you grew up on a farm there. That tells a story, I certainly about getting up early and the chores that, you hear the stereotype about the chores. So it makes sense. Now, where are you going, Herb, with the business? Like, where do you see yourself, you and your partners, 5 years from now? You guys have lofty goals, as you see some different iteration of the business. What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I would say to you, in terms of the business, is bringing some level of automation to the process, so that the three partners don't always have to go to travel, for example, and facilitate meetings. These days we have the ability to do more virtual settings,
right?
So I think helps somewhat, but building some automated passive revenue programs,
like online courses and stuff.
Yes, absolutely. So we want to do more of that. And we also want to develop, and we have relationships with what we refer to as affiliate partners. So we want to make sure that some of those contracts that we are able to take in our affiliate partners, whom are what do you call it? They're experts in those particular areas of needs. We can bring those individuals in to assist us and grow the company. We're also looking at how do we also partner with another company that Susan has worked with for many years. And I think part of the situation is, do we need to look at our strengths and weaknesses and combine for a complementary outcome? Mm-hmm. So we'll look at that company and say, okay, they do these 3 or 4 things well, and maybe put a label on it. They do the back of the house management processes very well, from accounts receivable to marketing to whatever. We may look at, okay, how do we merge our efforts? Now, how do we end up? Is it a merger? Is it a dual name process? Those are things that we're going to be looking at. We haven't delved into that deep enough yet.
Yeah, well, you've got a full plate.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, Herb, fascinating stuff. I know you and I could talk for hours on this. Really appreciate you doing this. Love to stay connected with you as you progress forward. I want to thank everybody for listening. And Herb, I know we'll talk again. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I thank you for the opportunity. It's great chatting with you, and great questions, man. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, man. For anybody who wants to contact Herb, you got to follow this guy wherever you're watching this. We're streaming this everywhere. It's either up above or down below. His contact information. We'll see you next time here on Giant TV.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul.
All right.
Had a good time.
All right.